Hi, folks. It's Charlotte here. I am coming to talk to you today about some things to look for when you're doing manuscript reviews. And so, yeah, this is not a definitive list by any means, but hopefully it will be helpful for those of you who are new to this. And so one of the things that's important to point out is that the BC NEAR is looking to, and the Indigenous Mentorship Network are really looking to facilitate student success, right? And so in that respect, we're always taking an appreciative or a strength-based approach to our mentorship, and just really trying to help students to provide the best example of their work and their learning that we can, right? And so hopefully some of these little tips will be helpful for you. But again, I'm sure many of you have your own way of engaging in this process. So again, this is just a little bit of the learnings that I've received over the years of doing manuscript reviews, and hopefully tailoring this to the specific needs of the folks that are submitting to the students showcase that we're putting together. So one of the things that I usually look for when I'm reviewing, and one of the sort of tips that I often will share with students is, making sure that there's something at the very beginning of the paper that grabs the reader's attention, right? And so, it doesn't have to be overly provocative, but, just a statement that that makes the reader want to, to continue reading. And then, letting the reader know what you're going to offer in the paper. So, when I'm reviewing, I ask myself, like, is the author telling me what this paper is all about? Like pretty close to the beginning, right? So grabbing attention, and then, letting the readers know, this in this paper, we're going to do this, or, however they want to frame that, right? And the other thing that we often look for, particularly within Indigenous research and scholarship, is, does the author introduce themselves, right? Do we know enough about them to understand where they're coming from? And that just doesn't mean their, indigeneity or community connections or their own racialized identity, but also, where are they coming from in terms of their own theoretical perspectives, their own worldviews, and so forth. And so for some things that's more appropriate than others, but oftentimes we do encourage that within Indigenous scholarship. We also want to make sure that the average person can understand the paper, right? And so, while our folks at BC NEAR and our guest editor, Robbie, are going to be looking at like typos and sentence structure and editorial stuff, we also want to make sure that the language that that our authors are using is understandable just to the average person, right? They're not using a lot of jargon, or if they are, that they're explaining what concepts mean, that they're clear about, how they're using those concepts, right? Just so that anyone inside or outside of academia could pick this up, and it would be a useful learning experience for them, right? We also want to make sure that, ideas are presented in a way that helps the reader understand the topic, right? So if a student is writing about a particular methodology that they found really helpful, then we want to make sure that that methodology or the ideas presented in terms of the students learning about it are presented in a way that helps the reader to understand that methodology, right? They're not, that the ideas and the topics flow in a way, that kind of moves us forward in our learning. And again, we like to assume, or I usually do assume, that we often will have what we call naive readers, right? So people who don't know a lot about this topic, right? And so part of the author's job is to help the reader to understand the topic, right? And so that not only the ideas are presented clearly and in an understandable way, but they flow from one, natural sort of place to another, so that our learning is, they call it scaffolding now, but that we're leading someone down that path from one, destination that necessarily is going to follow to another destination, so the reader doesn't get confused, lose their way, things like that. If the paper is around a methodology, we want to make sure what the approach actually is, right? We obviously are always looking for people to properly cite. And to me, the way that I explain it to students is that we're giving respect to the authors. We're not leaving it for people to question whether this is our ideas or someone else's. So we give respect and acknowledge where we're taking our teachings from, but that we are clear about what that approach is, but not just explaining the approach, what it is and, how it comes to help us in research, but why are we using that particular approach, right? I think that's an important thing, or at least it's something that I encourage students to think about. And then how are we using that approach? Oftentimes I find with students, particularly, they learn about an approach, but they don't really think about how they're going to use it, right? How are they applying it to their own research? And some of these papers may not be appropriate. Maybe they haven't used it. They're just talking about their own learning about it. And so, but where appropriate, I always ask students, like, how are you actually applying this? And we want to make sure that the methodology section, whether the paper is about a methodology or whether it's a methodology within a research paper where they're presenting results, we do want to think about things like, and they don't have to be framed this way, but people talk about epistemology, and again, that's really just the position that the author is taking with respect to knowledge, right? So are they assuming that, knowledge is something that they're going to go off and, pick out of a tree, or is there a subjectivity to the knowledge? How do they feel about learning from other people's perspectives? And then how might they use the knowledge, right? So people sometimes use the terms axiology, but really that just means how are they applying knowledge? And again, these are thoughts for you to potentially consider when you're reading. It's not going to be appropriate for all of them. None of these are, or most of them aren't, but something that might be useful in helping students really think through what they're saying and what they're presenting. And so again, this is always a learning opportunity for them by way of your mentorship. So if the paper is talking about research findings, is the author clearly describing the ways that they engaged participants, right? So how did they invite participants to be engaged in the research? Do they have an existing relationship with them? If so, or not, what are some of the ethical or community protocols that they followed, that they considered? And then, how did they engage with the folks called participants or co-researchers, or there's lots of different language that people use, but how did they actually engage with them in terms of gathering, what people would call data, or gathering information or stories, right? But also how, if they did, how did they engage participants and others, stakeholders, might be committee members, might be community members, in the analysis or the meaning making of that information that they gathered. Oftentimes, students will miss that really important component of research often, and particularly engagement of folks in the making of meaning. And so again, this is not to criticize them, but it's to help them think through some of the ways that they might do that, or that they have done it and just didn't think to talk about it, right? So obviously, if they're providing us with some findings, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, we want to make sure that they're supporting their claims, right? So if they're saying, participants said this, well, we want to see either quotes to support that. We want to see, if it's quantitative data, we want to see some sort of analysis of the quantitative data, just to say, like we want to make sure that what we're claiming to have discovered through our research is actually supported, so that maybe a more critical reader might say, well, why are you saying that? Like, how can you say that? And then you have some data to support that. And then obviously the conclusions that the author is drawing, right? That they actually align with what they have presented to us. So if I say, Indigenous women say that, their experiences of reproductive and sexual health are bound by, colonial structures around healthcare and sexuality and reproductive, supports. Well, if I'm saying that at the end, then that should have at least been part of what I was, presenting as findings, right? So we want to make sure that, what they are sort of concluding about their research actually aligns with what they're presenting. And if they kind of veer off a little bit, then we just say, oh, this is a really interesting, statement that you're making. Could you, maybe include some data that aligns with that a little bit more closely, right? So it's always about guiding. It's always about, gently questioning, offering potential sites of, further engagement, aligning things together. And so that is just some of the little tips that I take when I'm reviewing manuscripts, and I hope that they were helpful to you. And I'm happy to talk further if folks need to chat about some of your reviews. And we're really grateful to all of you for taking the time to mentor students in this way. I know how busy you all are, and we're really grateful to the work that you're doing for us and for the students. Take care.